All right.
That's probably us three.
We're here.
Uh, are you? Are you? Do you have YouTube open?
I do.
Okay.
I
Cheryl. Yeah, Cheryl's in the chat, but the stream hasn't started yet. There we go.
we going?
Yeah, we're live.
All right. All right. Welcome to episode 10 of Doing Church. And today we have a very, very special guest from the future. No, very special guest, Cheryl's husband, John. So give us a virtual clap. Woo! And the reason John's on today is because today, as we're doing church, we're going to actually go back to New Song, which some of you've seen us do before. And this time, we're going to do church at New Song Church, where Cheryl spoke this past weekend. And as I kind of prepare to pull that up, John, any thoughts you have, anything you want to share about that experience, or what is doing church been to you as you've been sort of watching us get this started?
Yeah, I think it's been a really nice. It's really nice to have the discussion right where alongside the actual sermon itself versus you watch something after and then you kind of break up into groups, that kind of thing, and talk about what you remember, because it's right, you can just stop it right there. And this past weekend, we actually got to be in the space and together, and there was a lot covered. So Cheryl, likes to jam a lot into her talks, and so this will be a kind of nice chance to go back through it and stop along the way and really break down all the things that she touched upon.
I agree. This is very cool. Yeah, I thought it was really cool too because it was around storytelling. It was a lot of really cool things, and then we actually kind of spent the weekend. I think it's the first time we actually we it's the first time we met in person, right, John?
Yeah, yeah. So it was kind of a nice. There was a lot of people from that church community, Dave's
Yeah,
community. It's really
it's
cool
pretty
meeting
cool. And
everyone.
um, this is what I think before we go into this. I think it's interesting about storytelling, and we'll see Cheryl break down like what she does with storytelling. But there was something unique that I've been actually spreading ever since I talked to you. We had lunch. Did we? Was it yesterday?
Yeah,
Was
yeah,
it yesterday? That's so weird. It feels like a long time ago because I had to fly, to come home. Um, but there's this term called calcification that you mentioned, and I would love for you to share that with the audience because as we go into Cheryl talking about storytelling and just her talk, I think that one of the things that this her work and the sermon does is it sort of works toward breaking that down. Because in my mind, I was thinking polarization was a thing. So if you could give us like a quick, like, 2 minute, 90-second sort of rundown of what that is,
yeah,
and then based on what you remember of the sermon, just kind of tying it in, queuing it up for us before we get started.
yeah. I think calcification is a term that has come up around some of the study of polarization that's been happening in our society, or societies all around the world, really. And what it is referring to is not just polarization where people are pulling into their side, but also the polarization is calcifying, similar to how like bones calcify. So it's becoming entrenched and stuck. It used to be that polarization could be addressed by people having more experience. And what's happening now is that the stories that people are hearing about the world are actually different,
Hmm.
because you can actually choose what information that you get to. We're not all reading the same newspapers. We're not all visiting the same websites anymore. Even if we are visiting the same website, the algorithm shows us different things. And so the stories that people are experiencing and living are becoming different. And that's one of the main contributors to calcification, or extreme polarization, or like polarization that's stuck.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I love that, and I think, in particularly with the way that the sermon ends at the end, and the questions that Cheryl asks us to think about, I think it'll be interesting to kind of have that, so hold that idea in mind. Without further ado, we'll get started, and we'll start and stop. We'll be popping inside the chat looking for your questions. If you have any questions for John, and once again, John is Cheryl's husband, and so it's become a family affair. Okay, and and so as we go through and do the reactions, we'll be looking at that from just many different perspectives. And so we'll be looking for your chats. And we're going to start up with a little bit of worship at New Song. A little special fact that I got this weekend is um, their worship leader is actually has a very diverse background. He's been in multi ethnic spaces as well as a place called the Church of God in Christ. He actually has a background in a Pentecostal sort of tradition as well. So I thought that was interesting as we start to kind of just seeing they have one of the most diverse worship teams from like neurodiversity and ethnicity. So I always find it cool to be at New Song. Hallelujah, hallelujah, we worship you for who you are. We worship you, we worship you. Hallelujah, 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 we worship you for who you are. You are good, you are good all the time, all the time. You are good, you are good all the time, all the time, all the time. You are good, you are good, you are good, you are good all the time, all the time, all the time. You are good, you are good, you are good all the time, all the time. You are good.
Your goodness will be. Your goodness has never depended on me. Hallelujah in the highest. You are good.
Sing that with us. Your goodness has been. Your goodness will be. Your goodness has never depended on me. Hallelujah in the highest. You are good. With my whole heart, say.
With my whole heart, I sing hallelujah. We get to sing it forever. Louder we sing hallelujah.
Do you usually get into this part of services when you go to them?
It really depends. I think the more, so I grew up like in a church that we had like the hymnals, like straight, like the 4-part harmony with the type of, no choir, but there'd be a piano player and you just kind of sang stuff. So really old school stuff. And then I think the like more contemporary Christian stuff that was played like wasn't that hip. And so Cheryl turned me on to like gospel stuff. And so it really depends on what the song, as musicians, we're listening to the changes and they're listening to kind of the arrangements and things like that. So the mashup that Eric put up together was like great. Later on, I don't know this song, so it's kind of new. And I think it's along the lines of storytelling. I don't know the story behind this song, and so it's just kind of a thing that I'm listening to, sitting there.
Oh wow!
So for a couple of these tunes, I didn't really I didn't feel necessarily that big of a connection to until probably like the second to last song.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's funny. This song, like the churches I went to, they sang the song all the time, but it sounded different and the groove was different, so it was interesting. Now, you're a musician, right?
Yeah.
I think that's super cool. What do you play?
I play trumpet primarily, and then I use the piano to help with figuring stuff out, just because it's kind of easy to just put a piece of sheet music or laptop on a piano and try to like figure out what's going on with it. And I haven't done so. Yeah, I think though, as far as like church music goes, I don't at least growing up, it wasn't like the most depth of music. 'Cause
I get that.
it wasn't a very musically inclined congregation. And so my
Mm,
brother actually played like piano, and he was just playing from the hymn book, the
mm.
hymnal. And then we were playing like, I think like 17th, 18th century songs and things like that. Like
Oh
things that have been
wow.
around for like forever.
Oh
Um,
man, see, y'all kind of like little bougie out there.
I think it was just whatever was in the church whenever the congregation
Oh,
took over, kind of a thing.
okay,
Yeah, so they had the books in the back of every pew, and then you just kind of pick it up,
okay.
turn it to a page, and then do something. Yeah,
Like a high church, like a high kind of church, a little bit.
kind of. Yeah, yeah. Things
Mm,
that a choir probably would sing, but we didn't have a choir, so it was just
mm.
the congregation just singing along with whatever.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, yeah. And so then I didn't really like see uh live worship music until much later. And then I would go to like Cheryl's church back in the Bay Area, basically, where she played bass, and then got to see like a
Okay.
bunch of stuff. And then yeah, and then she also brought the gospel concert to Monterey Jazz Festival. So there was a lot of
Oh wow.
yeah. And so we listen at home, and so like I got turned on to a lot of like cool stuff there too.
Wow.
What kind of
That's
music
pretty
was that?
cool.
What kind of music? Like, do you have a preference for music when you're in church? Like the type?
I mean, it kind of varies because I love like so I like anything that has like a soulful kind of thing that kind of
Yeah.
pierces your heart in a sense. But it's that sort of a lot of different types of music can do that. Um, so I love that song that was just playing for the nostalgia
Yeah. Yeah.
purposes. I just took my girls to go see Inside and Out 2.
Oh
So
yeah.
we just watched that, and it's about all these emotions and the character, the nostalgia. So basically, this movie starts where the little girl is she's because she hits puberty, so all these new emotions show up,
Right. Right. Right.
and there's this one emotion called nostalgia that's
Uh-huh.
like a grandma, but she keeps showing up, and they keep saying, no, no, you can't come for another 10 years, and they keep pushing her back in a closet. And so, but for me, that's why that I was this nostalgia came to mind when I was
Yeah. Yeah.
thinking about
Yeah.
that song they just did, because it's some of the songs. So nostalgia, actually, as I revisit music now, it kind of makes me feel I feel a resonance with it because of nostalgia purposes. But outside of that, I tend to like anything really acoustic sort of live musical setups that are expertly sort of executed. I just like it's really tends to be pretty moving to me as well.
Oh, got it.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Like I just when you mentioned nostalgia, I was trying to remember there was a song that we like sang at every closing of every service.
mm,
Doxology.
mm. Oh
Uh,
yeah,
right. So like that was kind of the environment I
yeah.
was in.
Praise God from whom all
All
blessings flow.
things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
isn't it interesting? I think that should be a study on that because it depending on what church you go to, it sounds different.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it, it's interesting though. That's intriguing. I hadn't
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
about that.
And so it was a very like musically it was very structured, and like
Mm,
someone will just pick a couple songs from it, but it was always the same book, like
hmm.
so new stuff wasn't being brought in. I really appreciate like Eric like bringing in new stuff, because every time we
Hmm.
go it's like new stuff. And I
Hmm.
mean, he did a mashup this time, and I'm like with
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with the chart topper, and it's like, all right,
Yeah, yeah, and I think these were Cheryl's. Did Cheryl suggest these songs, the ones that they did?
some she did, and then some they kind of pick and choose, because they have kind of what they're comfortable with or what they feel they're good at, and then
Okay.
they'll also try to accommodate. So I think the song that they ended up doing the mashup with was one that Cheryl had suggested.
Oh, which one was that?
I don't remember the name. I think it was
Yeah.
Survive, the I Need You to Survive.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, that's a classic. That's a classic gospel kind of thing. Come on. You know what? I'm excited about this, and that's the reason Cheryl's not on, because Cheryl doesn't feel comfortable reacting to herself,
Yeah.
which makes sense. But when I was there yesterday, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good that I feel like episode 10 has got to be this. And
Yeah.
so then amazingly, John's like, I guess, and I really liked watching John and Cheryl together. They had matching squirrel t-shirts. So it was it was like the dopest thing. At some point, we got to make sure we can get people connected to Squirrel Nation. because I thought that was super dope. Well, let's check into the announcements here and see what they as we lead up to the actual sermon.
You said yes to being with us this morning. Online, we see you. We're glad you're joining us as well. We're so grateful that you're also a part of our New Song family.
Speaking of family, good morning. I'm Hadley, and I'm so excited to get to be here with my mom. Not only am I here with my mom, but I also get to share this morning with my amazing New Song Youth family. So New Song Youth, we see you, we love you.
In the house.
And if you're new, welcome. We hope that you're feeling kind of a part of our family. And if you would like to get connected to share your story, we would love to see you at our Next Steps table outside after service.
Isn't she great? I'm so proud of her. This is so fun. So fun. If y'all don't know Hadley, she's a rising junior at Orange County School of the Arts here in Santa Ana. And so this is like the stage with the microphone. This is her playground. So it's fun to get to do this with her. I love that we're a community that highlights young voices. It's pretty cool, right? I also love that we're a community that takes care of our own, which is what we've been doing this last year to our home campaign. Thank you to so many of you who have already given so generously to help with the much needed renovations and updates to this building. We're so grateful for all your generosity.
If you would like to get more involved, learn more about our home, we would love to see you at our table outside after service. You can also scan the QR code up here to get the most recent updates, or we would love for you to join us at our Home Dinner on Saturday, August 17th, and you can RSVP for that at newsong.com/events.
Awesome. Another exciting event coming up at the end of August, save the date, Saturday, August 31st. We are hosting something really cool, y'all, in partnership with Shane Claiborne and the nonprofit that he runs called Red Letter Christian. Shane and Red Letter have been a partner of ours for years and years. We're finally getting to do this very cool thing. Friday and Saturday, August 30th and 31st, it's called Red Letter Christian Revival. We want you guys to be there. It's going to be really important conversations around the intersection of justice and faith. What does it look like to be just and be like Jesus, especially in light of kind of the current political setting right now? We're gonna have some important conversations, hoping for a revival in all the best ways. We would love for you guys to join us. There's a QR code behind me there as well. You can also stop by Next Steps if you have any questions. We hope you guys will join us.
And today with the youth in our hearts.
Man, they're blazing through these announcements. At first, I was like, I had to check and make sure it was moving at the normal speed, you know?
Oh yeah.
It felt like
Question for
Go ahead.
you.
Go ahead.
Do you other than like church, is there anything you regularly bring your kids to and will like stick around for? So as a parent, you're there along with your kids, along with other people who have brought their kids there.
Oh man, that's a good question. Well, at this stage in life, that's a really good question. Look at you. I'm like, what am I think about this? I'm about to be like, I'm not a good daddy. No.
And this is because
I think it's a good question.
there's kind of a tangent to like calcification around the loss of like third spaces where you can just kind of go with, to meet people in an environment that's not work and that's not home, right? Home is mainly family people, but is there a place other than church because we don't have kids, but you have them right now. Thinking back to like growing up, the only thing I can think of that was semi-regular was we had like Chinese language school on the weekends. Oh, and so the parents would hang out. Basically, our parents wanted us to learn Chinese, so they would take us to a school because it wasn't taught in school. There was no like language classes until high school, and so when we were in elementary and middle school, they would take us to. It was still a school, but it wasn't being used on the weekends. And so then there would be teachers that would basically teach like language there for us to like learn how to read and write and speak in Chinese. And so then the parents would basically just hang out while their kids were in class because it wasn't that long. It was only like a couple hours, every Saturday. Like my dad would play basketball with like other parents and my mom would just hang out. I can't actually remember what she would just hang out with some of her friends there. And then we would have kind of other like, kids who were learning Chinese that we'd hang out with in our grade and we'd get lessons and do, schoolwork and stuff like that. But that was another place that was outside of church that like we can actually see other families, and be like together. So I was wondering, but that was a long time ago. Also I dropped out and my Chinese isn't great, but like are there spaces that you like your family like meets with other families that aren't necessarily like long term? I mean, of course you'll invite like friends over and stuff, right? But like just a kind of regular thing where you meet other families.
That is a good question, and I thought about that when we talked about it yesterday. I'm thinking about in light of what we said, because one of the things you said is one of the things we see in society where that still happens. Really, like you see it in faith spaces, but it's kind of dwindling. That's why we're doing church,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then, but another thing that happening that you mentioned is one thing that brings people together: sports.
Oh yeah.
And that's one thing that it's like I spend a whole lot of time with my girls, and then because they have, it is getting pretty hectic. I don't know if anybody knows any '90s music, but it's like it's getting kind of hectic, like like that's like old school, right? But
Yeah.
that's like it's getting really hectic because we have multiple sports with both the girls
Right,
and
right. Every season
and
is a one.
volleyball season.
Yeah.
Yes, and volleyball season just started,
Yeah.
and my daughter's in two different leagues and just started Friday. It starts Friday, and I felt my heart kind of drop a little bit because I wasn't getting excited, but actually thinking about the qualification, because there is like a real life community, like you're out there, you're the other kids, other parents and stuff like that. So it's like an interesting thing. So we do that. That's a place we convene a lot,
That's
and we
cool.
do a lot with the school at
Yeah.
school. It's like actually every morning. That's what's the blessing of having like really flexible work and the way I work, because I mean every morning there's some sort of interaction and connecting point with their schools.
Yeah.
But and I think I see when people the empty nest could be hard because like once they move past that, I'm glad that I kind of how we connected all yesterday. It's like I see why people as they get older they start to connect in these like networks where they kind of travel with friends, because I think, I mean, to your point, that the calcification and like separation, it's sort of becoming more and more prominent. But
Yeah.
for us, with my kids, sports and the park, and we do date night. We do daddy daughter date nights like 2 or 3 times
Oh, that's
a
awesome.
month,
Yeah.
and it's sort of cool. But it's just us though. It's not other people, but
Sure,
we
sure,
we
sure.
try to do that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's where we kind of feel the flow of community. I think the
That's
rhythm
cool.
of community.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It is weird though, because because I was like my daughter's friends, their parents end up being friends, and then you have a little bit of it's a real interesting community that evolves out of that, out of
Yeah, yeah.
necessity.
And it's people that you may not have chosen if you
Oh,
if
not at
you
all.
just ran into them. Yeah.
And I
But
don't
that
mean in a negative way, but I would not have if you saw the group, you'd be
yeah.
like, oh my god, who are these people? This what kind of band of people is this?
Yeah. But then
But
that
they're
helps us
amazing.
connect to, our fellow people here, and then we'll
Yeah,
be
yeah.
challenged and we'll challenge them, and yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're getting to that point where Cheryl's about to be introduced. And so I think this is going to be really cool. So we'll be starting and stopping and keep the reacting flowing.
Cool.
Hey, she's kicking off the series. She's actually in the tech and AI world up in the Bay Area. She's been a longtime friend of New Songs. We're so excited to have Dr. Cheryl Chen with us. Can you guys help me welcome her up?
I almost yelled doing church from the back, but I didn't do it.
Hey, New Song.
Next time we'll bring signs.
It's so good to be back. This is my third time. My first time, I was like, man, being up here is I'm like, can I step up to the moment of being?
When you see her go up, what goes through your mind when that's happening? Like, what are you
She-
thinking right now from the audience?
Oh, I mean, not a lot. She's got this, because like
Mhm.
I've seen her do this so many times. Like
Mhm.
I'm not. There's not a lot of like. I'm enjoying the show. I think there's not. There's. I'm just gonna sit back and relax because she's spoken for like crowd. I think the biggest crowd I've seen her speak at was like 3,000 people.
Oh
And
wow.
so like the only that required like a lot more preparation, but like for her,
Mhm.
she could put together like a talk in like a week, or less.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And because she's always thinking about stuff, and so she can
Mhm.
just kind of like dip into that and like pull it together, and it's just cool
Oh,
to
that's so
watch.
cool.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a good way to get behind the scenes. This is
Oh
good.
yeah,
This is
sure.
good stuff.
We'll
Up
talk
here.
we'll talk about the
Go ahead.
talk like the week before. She'll just bounce some stuff off and be like, hey,
Oh.
what do you think of this? And then usually it's just a couple like minor notes here and there, like
Mhm.
something maybe yeah, just I'll bring a little bit of perspective to it, but in
Mm.
general Like it's not like, oh no, like how's she gonna do kind of a nervousness. It's yeah.
Like it's gonna happen.
I know it's gonna happen. I know it's gonna be good.
Yeah. So it's very Kobe, Michael Jordan like.
Yeah.
I don't know Cheryl Swoops. I don't know. It's gotta be. I guess Cheryl Swoops. That's funny. I didn't think about it. It's gotta be. Yeah, but it's very like you've seen it, so it's kind of like it's her thing.
I'm here to be entertained. Yeah.
Come on.
And it's interesting because Dave always talks about like how I'm really into squirrels. And right after I had heard about this opportunity, I was talking to Dave. I have this squirrel channel, so I actually post like every day. I post a video of a squirrel. And at the time when David asked, I had 10 followers.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a sign. And so I told New Song, you all that when I.
You guys, it's at the church is actually located at 1010 Santa. You see it. It's where the actual address is. So maybe there's something deep going on here. I don't know.
First came here.
Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, she was mentioning like that was the sign that like she knew she was supposed to be here that day. That first time she did it. Yeah.
Sweetness.
And then the second time I came here, I gave an update on how many that had gone up. So I had gone up to over 2,000. So then this time I felt like I had to update you again. And now I'm up to over 3,000. So look at all these numbers. Like, what does it even mean? I don't know. Like when I go to God and I'm like, look at all I've done for you. I'm like, here are these squirrel disciples that were made. But no, I mean, it just shows that as time goes by, things change and a lot has happened. Dave came out with his book, his memoir. How many people read the book? Yeah, I mean, I've heard all the bits and pieces of the story, but the way Dave puts it together this time was just so amazing. I was reading it in a coffee shop at work. So I work in a big tech company, and I'm in the coffee shop, and I'm just like immersed in it. Like I don't even see people around me, but they are around me. So I don't want to cause a scene. And it's like touching these moments that I've kind of put away and never fully processed. And those stories kind of reopen these memories. So I just start crying, right? But then there's people walking by you and you don't want to think anything's happening. So you're just like, oh no, I'm good. I have just something in my eye right now. Like it's not anything deep. But what it did was it stirred so many questions in me. And so I texted Dave and I was just like burning to know. I'm like, Dave, are you gonna get Simu Liu to play you in the movie when it comes out? Because it was just so well put together. You're like there. You can see what's happening. You can see what's going on.
You know what I noticed that I wasn't expecting with the talk? She's got a lot of good humor.
Yeah.
Does she tell jokes a lot, or like what is that? How did that come out? I mean, it's humorous and then it's unique because the squirrels are so unique. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think. I mean, she's funny. She's a funny person. I think. I mean, is your question just like how did she?
Yeah, because I wasn't expecting her because she drops a bunch of like humor. Like she could do a little stand up. Like if you condensed it all together. So just like, do you know where that comes from, or like does she practice it that way?
I think it comes from her teaching experience because she had to keep kids entertained. So like these are like 6th, 7th graders, and so like when you're trying to keep a bunch of like prepubescent like pubescent teens like engaged, you have to kind of do something a little bit different than you can't just read from the textbook. And so I think she finds ways of making the content a little bit more interesting than just like a paper reading or something like that.
That's amazing. No, because you could tell, because when you hear somebody that's good at doing that, you can hear it. Like you can tell, like, no, she's good at. I'm like, does Cheryl have like, does she moonlight as a comedian? That's my next question. Because you could tell, like, that's not like she's not wondering if it's funny. She knows it is.
Yeah, I think also, I've heard this, and I'll just repeat it here. I don't know how much like this is actually true, which is that like apparently musicians have like decent comedic timing just because they have decent timing overall. So if you're trying to actually move a crowd, it can be similar with words where you gotta set up your you gotta set up the music so that like there's a payoff. And so it's similar where you're setting up a punchline and then you want to have a payoff as well.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Look at y'all. Okay, that's good insight.
And the stories of all the challenges, the ups and the downs, a story of forgiveness, a story of reconciliation. It was so beautiful. And one of my quotes that I use all the time, because I'm so passionate about storytelling, in the story screenwriting world, they have this one screenwriter that always says, the mark of a masterful storyteller is to take a few moments and give us a lifetime. And there's so many moments to take. And when the right story hits you, and if you're hearing someone else's story, it kind of helps you make sense of some of the hardest, most challenging moments in your life. Sometimes you just have to set it aside because you don't know what to do with it. It's overwhelming you. But then the right story comes along and you're like, oh, wait, I can think about this in a new way. And I think the Bible does this, right? In the Gospels, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they're telling you the story of what they saw. And this is how we connect with the good news. There's another verse in 1 John that talks about, we also know that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding so that we may know him who is true. Now, that word understanding, anytime I come and talk, I'm always going to talk about understanding and what it means to love with the minds. Because stories is just a vehicle for which we gain that understanding of that story. Something that gets used a lot in ministry, I guess, are those tracts. Do you know what I mean when I say tracts? They're like these little pamphlets.
So do you have a track on you right now?
I don't
Are you ready? Because you got to be ready, bro. You got to
anytime.
What do you think about? I saw you kind of grown. What were you thinking when she brought that up?
It's a funny thing, right? Because cold calling people is uncomfortable, right? In general, and tract just feels like you're cold calling, but you also have you're doing it in person, and so it's even that much more, It obviously, if it didn't work, people wouldn't do it, but it's a numbers game. And I've never been comfortable with straight sales positions where you're just going to just make calls. Most people are going to reject you. And a couple, just that 1% of the time, you might get someone to bite, whether it's attract or selling vacuum cleaners door to door, which is how my parents bought their first vacuum cleaner. But that guy probably got so many rejections. I personally I can't handle that uncomfortableness of human interaction where I'm trying to push something on them,
Yeah. I'm trying to, the Jesus Salesforce feels weird, but you know what I mean? It's there are probably some churches that are using Salesforce.com.
Yeah.
I know they are actually. They're probably using it in the back end, or if they're using some software. So that feels kind of weird.
Before this talk, if someone had asked you, because I know you're a storyteller, what is storytelling? How would you have described it?
It's really how we interpret our inner and outer worlds is how I would define it.
Okay.
Because you're telling yourself a story, and then you're also, and this is in a micro way, and then there's also you're interpreting everything through a lens that becomes a story. So it's I think the way we understand, I think it's all telling a story. Everything tells a story.
So when you're trying to tell a story, what's the most important thing in your mind to keep to keep at the forefront?
The framework, and the framework as far as who is going to see this and why, and then I look for where is the conflict or the pain points, and that will work interdisciplinary wise. So it'll go if I'm telling if it's film, if it's learning content, if it's a product or anything like that, it'll all come from pain points, conflict, and why is this even necessary to happen?
Okay, but it starts with the audience and then what you're trying to communicate to the audience, and then that's cool.
Yeah, for me, because I got to find where the constraints are, because when you're free thinking, if you don't see a constraint, and that's why the witnessing and going out, I'm real comfortable with it, but I don't do it the way I've never done it that way.
Yeah.
I just go out and become friends, and then I have to do it long term. I can't come out and say, hey man, I can't talk to you for 5 minutes and say, hey, if you were to die tonight, I only way. Now listen, I'll do it, but I have to really feel it, bro. I have to, it has to hit me and be yo, bro, I know this, and I have to say, I know this sounds weird, bro, but if you were to die tonight, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds, I don't mean to make fun of it, but but I do, you just never know how a conversation may go. But
Yeah.
but
You're doing the hard sell is not your first choice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't believe. Yeah, I think sometimes a hard sell works if it's just time. People will
Yeah.
wait. That's where the numbers game comes in. But if you're selling it, to me, I feel like if you sell it too hard, there's something wrong with the product.
Yeah.
Most things that really work sales wise, it seems like it sells itself from my
Right.
experience.
Right.
And so if you're really working hard, you might be doing
where they're at.
propaganda.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a few thoughts. This is cool.
You hand out to people. I have an example of one. This was the one that I actually thought was actually pretty good. So raise your hand if you've ever read a tract before. All right. Raise your hand if you've been the person handing out to people on the streets. Yeah. A lot of people have done this. And so these are just stories to help gain understanding. And God uses stories to help us gain understanding of him. In this story, you got this boy who loves these ants. Just like, I get that, I love the squirrels. But he knows that these ants, they're just going on with their lives. They don't know the weather forecast that it's going to be a flood. And they're going to have to find higher ground or they're all going to drown. So he's like trying to tell the ants, but the ants don't understand him because the ants only speak ant stories. And he's trying to tell like people stories to these ants. So the little girl's like, hey, if you need to like let these ants know what's going on, you have to.
Wait, is this an actual track?
Yeah.
This is kind of a cool track, though. I would have stopped.
She was saying this is one of the better ones.
Did she make it?
No. She just found it somewhere. Yeah, I think she was just searching around for tracks that people have posted, and so
like when I saw it before, I'm looking at it like this is enough to make you could do this at Berkeley. People will be like, "What is this?" That's really intriguing.
Yeah.
Huh.
Become an ant and then be an ant so that those ants can know. And even if even if he becomes an ant, they may not believe him. So then the boy's like, oh my gosh, like, do I really love these ants that much that I would become an ant? It's like really deep. But what I want to illustrate with this again is that our understanding comes through stories. And that's not just like through Bible stories. People who study stories, they're known as narratologists. And so I have a quote from a narratologist that wrote, this is the introductory to narrative in the book about understanding, like kind of like what are the components of story. And narratologists argue that we don't really believe something is true until we see it as a story. That means like everything that happens around us, we tell ourselves a story with that. I have with me I hope I still have it with me. I have this bag of chips, for example, and I was eating a bag of chips and it's not really that deep of a story, but then I read the back of it and it said every time I buy this bag of chips, I'm helping to make a difference. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe it's just like eating chips would make a difference. And so like these are the stories okay. So people might be like, all right, you're just thinking too deeply about this. It's not that deep. And if you know me, it always is that deep for me. So why isn't it that deep? Because I always find it fishy, right? When someone's like, oh, it's not that deep, or you don't need to understand so much. And they'll even like pray that the peace that transcends all understanding comes, or that I shouldn't lean on my own understanding. And we all get this because God is bigger than our understanding. But does that really mean that we should check our minds at the door? Does that mean that like we just don't need to understand because everything's just transcending our understanding? Because, like it is. And it's really fishy to me if someone's like, you shouldn't be thinking for yourself. Don't try to understand. It's not that deep.
The last time I was in that, it turned out it really was a cult. Like they're like, oh, you don't need to think about this. I'm like, oh snap, this seems like this is a cult. They're like, well, we're not a cult. But then you start Googling it and it was. So whenever I tell you to do that, that's usually not good. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, if we look at scripture, going back to one of my favorite verses, people say like John 3:16 is kind of the verse that captures Christianity. But to me, like Jesus highlighted what the most important thing was. And in it, he says, this is the most important commandment, to love God, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength. There are no commandments greater than these. And in this story, right, as we're telling ourselves and understanding things through the stories, I think it is that. It can be that deep. And that capacity to think and be curious expands the capacity to love God with all of our entire minds. Sometimes in the verse it actually says, some translations it'll say, love God with all your understanding. And so today, this is like, we're saying this is the question I want you all to ask yourself today. Whose story are you telling about yourself? Are you telling yourself and about yourself? Is it your story? Is it God's story? Is it someone else's story?
That was when I saw that on there, I was like, oh snap, this is gonna be dope. You know, because because that really changes your life if you can figure that out. That's where I was like, this is why I was like, we got to do this today, because when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is gonna get to the core of really, really important things.
Is there? Can you remember a time when you like realized after the fact that you were living out someone else's story for you?
Oh man, I mean, it's frequent. I think it's layered. I think it's a lot of areas where that's the way that way. You know, I mean, I think there was times where I was trying to live my mom's story that she had for me, or my dad's, or some sort of story about myself that I wanted to be true that wasn't. You know, like it's just there's a lot of different things I may have tried.
Actually,
yeah,
that's interesting, right? That's it's similar but different. Where so there's like, yeah, every parent wants their kid to be, some way, right? And the kids got to figure out for themselves who they are. But then there's also the flip side. That's from the outside in, and then from the inside out, it's I want to live this story so bad that I'm like completely blinded to like this isn't even my story. This shouldn't be my story, but I really, really want it. We know someone who I can't tell this without people figuring out who this is, so I'm not going to. So yeah,
this guy's running for president, and he goes to this convention, right? With a bunch of black journalists.
I think. Okay, you gave me an out. Biden stepping down was really hard for him because he was coming to terms with the story he wanted to tell about himself wasn't going to happen. Right? He like, because I think from what I've heard, like everyone who runs for president is delusional, no matter who they are, because it's such a long shot. So many things have to line up perfectly for it to go on that you just have to like you can't have any doubt in your mind, even though you should, that like this is going to happen because it's such long odds, right? You need like so many millions of people to actually like you.
Yeah.
Right? It's like him thinking he could do it was like versus like the coming to the realization that he couldn't be, like it wasn't going to happen if he stayed in was a really, really probably like hard thing for him to do just personally. I think that's a case where someone's internal story about themselves, right? Because no one wants to say like I can't do this anymore. I think we talked a little bit about this weekend about when you get to the end of your life, you're not planning for the future. You're always planning for the future until you're not, and so that's a really hard thing to like come to terms with. And that happened a couple of weeks ago.
Wow, that's a good point. Well, this hit me because she talked about narrative psychology, and I think that's a really good point around Biden stepping down. And I think even what's interesting, so there was this, I took this seminar around storytelling, and they said there's two things. There's what happened and the story you tell yourself about what happened.
Yeah.
And a lot of your personal change can happen when you stop telling the story about what happened and just allow what happened to be what happened, So
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like it makes it easier to make those kind of decisions. Like when he had to decide to step down, he probably had to make some sort of break from like, okay, the story versus, okay, this is what's happening and this is what will happen if I don't take action,
Yeah. Actually, I think Cheryl actually covers that a little bit later.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
You may not know the answer, but at least ask yourself that question, right? And whoever story you are telling, like, just own it. Just know that this is someone else's story that I'm telling. Because this comes up.
It'd be funny if like the seminar I was in was this. Like I was in the seminar. It was really cool. This girl was squirrels, right? And
In many different ways. I got a book I'm going to show you today. It's called Tell Me a Story. So this is written by Roger Schenck. He worked in actually artificial intelligence. So we talk about like how I kind of work in that space, in that field. And in artificial intelligence, we think of like ChatGPT or Gemini today, and it's everywhere, and it's doing all these things. This book was actually written in the 90s. So this is like AI in the 80s. This is what AI was back then. And in the book, he talks about understanding human intelligence through stories and a concept he calls story fitting. He's like, we're not actually telling ourselves stories. We're really just fitting events to a story that's satisfying to us, especially high emotional impact. We want to feel that these stories make sense to us. And that he even goes as far to say that it's kind of a deceptive process. You know, you sometimes will create stories that aren't exactly totally true just to fit them into something that makes sense to you. And then the next passage, it says that this is an attempt to make it comprehensible to not just yourself, but to how other people understand you. And so we use stories. It's a very calculated, very purposeful thing that we do. It's a very important aspect of human intelligence. And as somebody who studied technology, this is something that like really motivated me. My dissertation was up here. Those screenshots were actually taken out of my dissertation, where I studied artificial intelligence applied to storytelling and the understanding of what leverage these tools can have to.
How can you argue with someone who that's what their understanding is?
Oh, what do you mean?
Like how would you argue with Cheryl if Cheryl is really clear on this? Like if you're having a conversation, does she usually win those kind of? It seems like she'd be very persuasive.
She wins. Oh yeah, she wins a lot.
He's like, bro, I can't really talk about that. That's one of the things we're not gonna talk about. Oh, because I was looking at that, I was like, how do you make an argument with someone that's thinking in these frames? You know, I think it'd be kind of hard to win.
Yeah. This is where she's definitely expert.
Augmenting the things that we want to accomplish, the things that we want to say. If we want to go back even further in time, so we had the 1980s AI. This is 1960s AI. So in this, there's early, computer scientists. A lot of early computer scientists were also psychologists. And he says that the individual is confronted with a challenge to his belief system, and the problem he must solve now is, what am I to believe now? And what he's saying in that is that that when we're given events and ideas that contradict our sense of reality, they contradict our belief system, it creates a lot of tension in us. And either we have to change the thing that we've learned, or we have to change our belief system, and that our belief systems are the last things to change. That reality, we want to keep harmonious as much as possible. And when something comes to contradict that, it starts to feel unsafe. And so we want to maintain our sense, and we'll do all sorts of mental gymnastics to make sure that whatever is happening out here lines up with our belief system. Not so much the truth of what's going out there, but the truth of what satisfies us.
I know you got something insightful for this.
I think this is what I was talking about, where she was kind of encapsulating what we were just talking about. We don't know what happened with the decision to step down, but confronting that I'm too old for this was probably really, really hard. It's like the very, very last thing that was going to happen, because there's all this stuff out there, but you're hanging on. Like this is one of the reasons why, probably. I'm just randomly guessing, but why people will hang on to things that affirm their belief for as long as they do. So I'm sure there were some polls saying like, "Hey, you still have a shot at this," and then they were probably they were saying like, "Hey, look at this like one poll," even though all these other polls were saying like, "This isn't happening," like, and it's getting worse because you're going to look for any shred of anything that supports your story of who you are
Yeah.
and what you believe. I was actually going to ask, like, can you are there times that you can remember where like
Mm.
you actually had to change your belief because you were so challenged, but you resisted uh, just because it was really uncomfortable to do?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's one thing you kind of confront. I confront that every day because as an entrepreneur, it's like, okay, why am I doing this? And sometimes a lot of the biggest breakthroughs that I've had tend to happen when I pushed through the point to where I was about to quit. A real famous book that's really simple is The Dip. The Seth Godin's The Dip. And it's like if you want to go up, in order to get up, the higher that you want to go, the lower you have to go.
Yeah.
But the problem is if so, it's two things. One, if you're going low and you don't want to get to this next place, that's a problem, and that's tends to be he called it a cul-de-sac. But here's the thing that's the worst, which I think what you just described with what Biden had to do is sometimes you may want to get up here and you're having to go down, 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 and it's like how to figure out that you can't, that this isn't gonna work.
Yeah.
I think, but sometimes the death of a dream is actually the birth of something, but it's like, so many times in my life I had to, like, I had worked on a film for like 10 years, and I had worked, or there's other projects like this where you realize that it's not going to work because the finish line is changing, because no one cares about specifically what you're doing but you, and then you have to kind of reevaluate, like, why am I doing this, and if you can't see the end, it's very few things that you keep working at when you can't see the end, so
Yeah.
those are sort of things that I've personally kind of run into where I'm like, wait, it does change. Another thing that really comes to mind with this is when you're doing behavior change in an organization, that the hardest, like when you're doing change management, they like when you're doing learning and development, the most difficult change to create is behaviors.
Yeah.
And when you see its behavior, usually that's when they decide to let a person go if you've done all the warnings. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting question. But when this came up, I was like, wow, I think about storytelling for change all the time, but a lot of it's really has to be done in context with what's happening in culture and what's happening on a micro level with the people you're telling the stories to.
Yeah. I probably should have like prepared an actual like significant example. The only concrete thing I can think of, and I know this has happened in my life, is around just like procrastination and deadlines, where
Mm.
I'm thinking like I have the story about myself. I've done
Yeah.
this work. Like it happened a lot in school where it's like, oh, I was able to get my homework done like the night before, so I can
Mm.
probably do it again. Except this is probably like a semester long project that I'm trying to cram into a night. And I have this belief about myself that like, oh, there's nothing, I've gotten it done before. I'm smart. I can figure it out. And then
Mm.
come the next day, I'm like not even half done, and I just have to like go and basically say like, I didn't do the assignment. And it's like a tough like thing to realize
Mm.
about yourself.
Mm.
And then interpersonally too, like sometimes like we don't want to see ourselves as the villain, of our own
Mm.
stories, but sometimes we're the villain in other people's stories, and it's a
Mm.
real uncomfortable thing to
Oh,
realize.
that's
Like,
real hard.
oh, I am not, I am not the person that I thought I was. But
Mhm.
you're gonna fight it, and you might actually
Mhm.
make some people feel bad, along the way, until you
Mhm.
realize like, oh, I was in the wrong here. I
Mm.
think I need to apologize.
Mm.
At a certain point, especially like, as a kid too, right? Because you're still just learning how it all works. Um,
I
yeah,
think that's a big one. I think anytime you have to when you really realize that you were wrong and you have to apologize, which I end up doing that at least 4 times a day with my wife. I was like, wait, you know what I mean? But that is a very, and then to try to like apologize and actually it be a repentance in the sense of changing.
Yeah.
That is a tough one, but it is,
Yeah.
that is, I run into that. That is a frequent practice that I have.
And I think it's because of these stories because
Mhm,
these stories come from our beliefs and how we see the
mhm,
world, and then how we see
mhm.
ourselves is probably really, really hard to,
Yeah, yeah,
change that story. Um,
I agree. This is good.
Us and the story that we're telling ourselves.
Mm,
And so I was so passionate about this. I didn't just study it, I also taught it. And so I would teach artificial intelligence. I taught for Stanford University's pre-collegiate program in 5 different countries. So I was in like Kazakhstan, and like I saw people didn't even know where Kazakhstan was on the map. It's a huge country, by the way. And like I was in India and Peru, and I got to explain artificial intelligence and design concepts, oftentimes through games. So I would have students like conceptualize and think of these interactive spaces where they could tell their stories. There was one game I would tell them in particular. And in this game, it's called Train. It was made by a really well-known game developer named Brenda Romero. I actually was her TA when I was in grad school. And this is a really interesting game. She only made one copy. There's only one version of it. And she's always there when it's played. So it's only been played a handful of times. But every time it's been played, and I tell this to the students, every time it's been played, it's never finished. Like people end up just not wanting to finish the game. And the students would think, that's really weird. Like, why wouldn't you want to win the game? We're playing games every day. Like, it's all about winning, right? And I would say, okay, well, in this game, you're loading these little pieces into the train, and then you're a train driver, so you're driving the train to the destination, and then you let the people off, and that's it. And it's like, the more people you drive, the more points you get, something like that. So the students it's just like I'm not telling them the answer. I mean, I know what the punchline is, right? I know what the actual conclusion of this is. The students, I'm just like, so what is the situation where you wouldn't want to drive a group of people from point A to point B? And then it clicks for some of them. They're like, wait, is this World War II? Wait, are we in Germany or Poland? And it turns out, like on the cards, it eventually, later in the game, it reveals that you're in Auschwitz. And you're driving large groups of people to concentration camps, to gas chambers to end their lives. And so when people realize this in the game, they get up and they say, I don't want to play anymore. And the students, they got it. They really did. They understood, because there are games we play in life where winning is actually losing, right? Where we gain the whole wide world, but yet we lose our soul in the process. And so I had asked the students, hey, why don't you all design a game? What trains are we driving today? We can look back and say, yeah, I don't want to drive that train, but what trains are we driving today? And they had some really amazing stories. They came up with some really great concepts. I'll give you a couple of them. One of the students came up with a concept of like iPhone manufacturing. So they want to win by making more iPhones. And then he's telling the story of the middle school student, just like him, that's like in the sweatshops making and assembling those iPhones. There's another student that was, created a game around social media and was like, oh, we can maximize all these things. We can get profits and advertisers and whatever. But then you lose all your self-esteem when you use it.
Oh.
And there's one where it's really focused on the environment. And then the more you win the game, the worse the environment gets as a result. And I was just like, well, I didn't even think of these. Like,
now that is deep. Do you have any games or things that in life that it's not worth you wouldn't want to play the game to win it?
I used to work in online advertising.
Oh wow!
I don't want to do that ever again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I have the luxury of the choice, right? If I'm in a situation where like I have a family to feed, then like it's tough. It's really hard to make a moral stand, which is understandable. But it's an industry. You're selling people's attention, which is already feels kind of gross. To people to sell stuff to them that they may not even need. I think there is a moral side to advertising, which is matching solutions with problems, right? If I need to get from point A to point B, right? Like a car advertisement is appreciated because it's helping me like know what's out there. But like especially to this day and age where we can like manufacture stuff for really cheap. Like there's a big problem actually growing in social media on TikTok. I think in Instagram, less so YouTube, where influencers will say, "Hey, check out this shirt. It's really cool. It's really, really cheap. You can buy it," and then they'll just put the link right there. And then there's a phenomenon now where like young adults are basically saying like, "I spent like X number of dollars like last month, and I didn't need to. It's just a bunch of stuff like junk arrived at my door, and I'm never going to use it. But because this influencer told me like they thought it was cool, and I was just in the moment. It was so easy to buy. I ended up just buying the thing. And there's like it is a growing like problem in terms of like people who would prefer not to buy these things, but because their attention is being sold to people who are just trying to sell them things. Yeah, and I think we talk about this a lot. But
Wow.
I don't know. Is there anything any line you wouldn't cross?
Oh, it's a lot. I have a lot of I've a lot of times there's some political organizations that approached me over the years, and when I see what the intent is, I usually I don't engage with it. There's been and the biggest difficulty is when it is not the issue isn't spoken directly to know what the intent is, and then you get in, you're like, wait, this is going somewhere, and I don't know how conscious the people are that are driving it to what's happening, but it wasn't ever explicitly said. And I've had a few of those recently where I'm like, okay, I don't want to win at this because I see where this is going.
Yeah, there's two layers to that. There's the people that are thinking they're doing something good but not realizing they're doing something bad, and then there's the people who are knowingly hiding something because they know people wouldn't like it, and they're trying to. I looked up the rules to the train game because I was actually curious about how it was played and how people got there. And it was relatively simple. Essentially, your goal was to get as many people to the destination. So you're trying to pick up as many people as possible and deliver them. And then there would be these cards. And so the card would either speed up your train or slow down your opponent's train. So the entire time you're thinking, I'm competing with like the other train drivers and not really even thinking about like what's happening. And then when you get to the destination, then they tell you, oh, you have arrived at like Auschwitz, or you have arrived at some other concentration camp. And so that's how the reveal was done. And that's how people were so into like the game they were playing, they didn't even realize what the broader thing was happening. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening with people who are trying to hide their agendas is, hey, here's a thing that you can, here's some stuff to distract you. Either it's you can make some money off of this, or it's for this good cause, supposedly.
Yeah, I think, and there is probably a large contingency, particularly if you're dealing with something creative, where people they set out with good intentions, but it's definitely going to give a negative outcome. And usually or the thing, and this is something I've run into, and I'm saying this in this non-specific ways I can say it. I've been in situations where people are fighting certain trends or negative forces, but they use the power from those negative trends and forces within the process of creating something that's supposed to stop it. And so, and I've been in multiple scenarios like that, to where now I've had to develop some sort of questionnaire and evaluation just to ensure that's not happening and to check in on it. Because that's been a very interesting, it's like you're almost creating the thing that you want to end. You know what I mean? I've seen that a lot.
This is where I really like the Henry VIII. Uses, because it's a way of illustrating the problem, but in a way that like is not politically relevant at all. But it's like in terms of like no one cares about Henry VIII anymore, right? But it's like you can see the parallel so easily.
That's probably coming up soon. It's amazing.
These students, they came up with these ideas and they really get what's going on. Like, it makes me feel really good that they are thinking about these things. Because when we come to it, there's a book that talks about Auschwitz. It talks about Poland. It's a book called Ordinary Men. And it's about the final police battalion. It was 500 men in this police battalion that was responsible for the final 80,000 deaths of World War II in these camps. But what's amazing about this is that it's called ordinary men. Like, these weren't any special people. These are ordinary. They're people like you and me. They're just doing their jobs. They just were doing what they thought they were supposed to do. And so these are the stories. Like, what story are we a part of? And are we able to think about it like that? And so when I asked, it was amazing asking these kids that they were able to see that so clearly. So if we move from like a group of
Does she have chips in her bag? Those chips are the ones she used earlier. I think that's pretty cool. It would be cool if she just started eating them. I think that's awesome.
Kind of chowing down, yeah.
I'm telling myself a good story. That's what you have to do to eat the chips. You have to tell yourself a good story about it. And the story that you're enjoying has got to be greater than the story of health. Isn't that intriguing? Y'all got me thinking over here. Yeah.
Ordinary men. Let's talk about a couple extraordinary women, or at least really well-known women. Who knows these women? Oh, okay. They're the wives of Henry VIII. Henry VIII, 1500s England. And Henry VIII had 6 wives. And you're not really supposed to have many wives back then. Like, it was not like a thing. The Pope wasn't down with that. You can't divorce your wife, right? It's like divorce was seen as inappropriate, even for the king.
I love that she said that the Pope wasn't down with that.
Like, the King of England. Do you know how you remember what happened to these wives? Yeah. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. That's how you remember. That's like this common way people will remember the stories of these ladies. And what's really, so people use the Bible, right? We all know this. People use the Bible in many ways. Some use it to seek truth. Some use it for their own personal gains. And so here we are, like Henry VIII wants to divorce his first wife, and the Pope says he can't do it. And so he's just like, well, I'm the king. I'm going to do what I want. I don't need to listen to the church anymore. Right? I'm just gonna like spin off. And it's not like he wasn't alone in like thinking like, we need to like, I don't want to be held to your authority. Like, I don't want to write your story, Pope. There's another guy in the 1500s, really well known for Germany. Does anyone know who that was? Luther, Martin Luther. So all of Protestantism kind of branched from his 95 Theses in Germany. And Martin Luther was really questioning, like, do we really need these intermediary steps to get to God? Can we connect directly to God? This is like the Protestant Reformation, right? And so Henry VIII is like, oh, look, this guy's doing something. He didn't even agree with Martin Luther at the time. He actually like denounced what Martin Luther was doing and was rewarded a defender of the Catholic faith. But as soon as he realized that it would serve his agenda in like what he wanted, which was to marry Anne Boleyn, he then was like, oh, well, I don't feel like we need to all adhere to the Catholic Church either. And so if you look at the difference between like kind of the most kind of prominent lineage comes out of Catherine and Anne. And Catherine was Catholic and Anne was Protestant. Now, I want you to imagine like you're in England in the 1500s, you're part of the religious minority, you're a Protestant, and all of a sudden the king's like, yo, I'm going to promote your faith. Like, that's going to be the official faith of our country. And you think, oh my gosh, the king wants to be part of my story. The king is now getting with the program that I've been a part of. And then it turns out he's just doing it because he wants to divorce his wife. And in reality, what's happening is he's using your story so that he can write his own story. He doesn't really care about your story. It's really about his story.
When she's saying this, is she meaning this to be as deep as it is? Like, is this an extended metaphor for what's happening in the world?
Yeah.
This is mad deep, man.
I think she was hoping that people would start to just think of. I mean, it's in the last, the questions that she asks at the end too. This is just such a great example because it is a politically powerful force leveraging a politically not powerful force to do something that most people, if they knew the real reason, would not support. But they're kind of co-opting a movement that was already happening, right? Like, you had people who wanted to break away from the church already, the Catholic Church specifically, And so when they saw that the king was willing to break away from the Catholic Church, um, he needed them, because if he did it alone, then the Catholics probably wouldn't be too pleased, right, within the country, because it was a majority Catholic country. But he was basically able to ally himself with the Protestants and say, "Hey, we're doing this. We're going to break away from the Pope, and then I'm going to be in charge." Which a little sus, but right, like they were like, everyone was blinded by the enemy, and my enemy is my friend, kind of a thing. And
Intriguing.
it wasn't until afterwards they were like, "Oh, he doesn't really care. He just wanted to, move on to the next wife."
Oh wow. This a lot of this reminds me of like Christopher Buckley novels. You guys ever read those?
No.
Really good political satire. I read everything he writes. He has a lot of great ones. One is like No Way to Treat a First Lady. And it's really kind of dealing with like the Clintons sort of stuff, Supreme Court justice. He's got a lot of really Boomsday about Social Security, but it's sort of telling the stories in similar fashion. So I love this. This is really good.
I found actually two historical examples of like political movements being co-opted for like basically ends that most people probably wouldn't support. Do you know where the term litter bug came from?
Oh no,
it's
not from Texas.
It came from an
because in Texas they said don't mess with Texas. That was like the way that they said don't litter.
Oh, got it.
But I mean, outside of that, that's all I know.
So there's an organization called Keep America Beautiful that was founded in the 1930s. It was started by the beer, soft drink, and candy and cigarettes companies. The reason was because around that time they started switching from glass to plastic bottles, and for cost, right? Plastic is less expensive; it doesn't break, but the problem was that so glass bottles you used to recycle, and then they would just reuse the bottles. Plastic, people were just throwing out of their cars on the side of the highway, and so there was a real like trash problem, and people started getting really angry at these companies for manufacturing these like throwaway products when they knew that they could reuse glass. So they made this organization, Keep America Beautiful, and essentially, instead of taking responsibility for like making something easily throwawayable, they said it's your fault for not actually throwing stuff away. And so they joined with the environmental movement, but shifted the blame from the companies to the actual individuals. So it's basically, instead of, we could be doing something as a company to make it so that you don't throw these things away by reusing glass bottles, it's your fault for not throwing them away. And so a ton of money. They are also responsible actually for recycling becoming a thing in America, because they were also like working with the environmental movement. But essentially in 2020, a documentary some investigative journalists found that they knew that recycling actually wasn't economically viable. It would always be cheaper to make new plastic. And what we've actually been doing for decades is just taking our recycling and then shipping it off to third world countries for them to either burn or like sort through and like figure it out while we use new plastic here. And one of the reasons, like very recently, China stopped accepting plastic. And so a lot of local recycling around the country has just stopped actually processing recycling, and they still end up throwing it in the trash.
Oh, wow.
And they knew this, and they knew it wasn't actually like possible to cheaply recycle stuff. But they use the environmental movement to shift blame to the individual consumers. It's your job to throw it out. It's your job to recycle.
Wow.
And yeah. Do you remember the like ad about like a bunch of litter and there's like a crying Native American dude? It's like a famous ad from the 1970s where like there's a bunch of trash and then like a Native American with a single tear. Like they made that ad to encourage people to like throw stuff away and recycle.
Wow.
Also, that guy's Italian. That's like another like whole separate thing.
Well, that's problematic in deep ways.
In a fun way.
And it says "Keep America Beautiful" is what the campaign.
Keep America Beautiful. Sorry, I think I said 1930s. That's the 1950s. The 1930s one is the term jaywalking. So cars came out in like the early 1900s. A lot of people were getting killed because there were no rules around it, and they called them J drivers at first. J was a term for like noob. Would be the like modern day equivalent. And so then all of a sudden the car companies like started pushing this term jaywalkers. So it's the pedestrians' fault for getting themselves killed with all these cars, because the automotive companies wanted people to buy more cars. And so if people are getting killed by them, they're not going to buy them. So then they basically said, oh, it's the pedestrians' fault. Cars are great. And so they like basically like help push a lot of like traffic laws, making it illegal to like jaywalk, so that the streets, because people used to walk in the streets. And so now like you can't do that anymore, because now the streets are for cars. And so everyone got kicked off the like streets as a result. And so they took the movement of like, hey, there's a problem in the streets, and then they kind of moved it over to they shifted the blame to pedestrians instead of the cars.
Wow, this is interesting. When I start thinking about political campaigns, this is intriguing.
Because it's happening today too, right? There's people who are like, oh, we're for your thing, but we're really trying to push our thing. But as long as you like, you know, as long as you can get us into the office. Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, let's pop in. Wow, this is good. Thank you so much. This is good.
And you're just part of that. You're helping him live his story, you know, like, and that's why it's important to know whose story are you telling yourself.
It's almost like she knew you were going to make that give those examples. This is amazing.
And that's not the only area where there was kind of like a disconnect, right? It created even more of a conflict because of that switch. The transition between the Catholicism and Protestantism was not, and it's even then, it's like not exactly Protestantism, it's just not Catholicism as it was. But it created a lot of tension between the two groups, the two wives, and it actually manifested in their daughters. So Queen Mary was Catholic, and Queen Elizabeth, so these are both his daughters. Queen Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne. She was Protestant. And there's this, I don't drink, so I don't even know if that's the right picture. But there's this term called Bloody Mary, which was the nickname of the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, the first wife that was divorced, the Catholicism, because she was trying to bring the church back to Catholicism, and just so many lives were lost. And what I find compelling about that is that no matter which side you were on, everybody was doing this in the name of God. They were doing it because of their love and their devotion to God. They were doing God's work. So,
I think that was
what are the stories that we're telling, and whose story?
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that was a slightly sarcastic comment that like the audience didn't like pick up on. Was that everyone was doing it for God, you know, in quotes.
That's really good.
Story are we telling, right? Dave always talks about this, because Dave talks about, you know, your spiritual quotient and your Sherpa. He talks about this idea of a spiritual compass, like where are you orienting yourself? And I'm like, Dave, you're right. That's so important right now, because there's all these signals. There's all these people who want to kind of take control over all of our stories. There's a documentary. It's actually on YouTube, I think. It's called Century of Self. I think it was like a early 2000 documentary, and it was going over kind of the history of psychotherapy. What's really compelling about this documentary is that back in, you know, the mid 1800s, it was like kind of when psychotherapy was coming up and coming. So there was these famous psychotherapists like Sigmund Freud, and would talk about like the ego and things like that. This concept of self didn't really exist before then. People weren't thinking, am I content? Am I self-actualized? Do I have purpose? You kind of just did what you needed to do. And this was a modern thing to have a story that you were the center of. And interestingly enough, a few decades later, there was a kind of a move in the marketing space where they realized that, oh, if people need to self-actualize, we could actually take that story and sell things to people to help them with that and make money. So one of the examples they had was called the Torches of Freedom. And so back in 1900s, early 1900s, it wasn't accepted for women to smoke. They might do it in private, but it would be looked down upon. And so
Helen Kang.
a cigarette company was like, oh, we should hire one of these psychotherapists to teach us how to like help broaden our market. And so now, okay, imagine you're a woman in 1929 and you've got your torch of freedom and you're smoking and you're like, I am so liberated, look at me. It's like, you know, women are not second class. We get to smoke just like the men. And you're thinking, man, I'm fulfilling my story. But really, you're just fulfilling the story of some man that wants to sell you cigarettes so that you can buy them and that you can fit the model, fit the narrative that he's telling. And so what is it? Is it about these numbers? Is it about the sales? Earlier in the beginning, I showed my dashboard. And so this is like the last month, and I got 59,000 views. Oh my gosh, right? Like that's like so many people. I don't even know how to think about that. But if you look, you can't really see it, but I
What is? I had a thought. What is like the silliest thing that you've bought that you regret because it looks cool, like in an advertisement, or because like your friends had it?
Man, I'm looking around my office.
I can think of two when I was younger. Which one was I don't know if you remember Pogs.
Pugs?
Pogs. It was this like game where you took like a metal disc and you threw it at like a pile of cardboard discs, and then they would.
Oh
like,
no, I
melt.
didn't see that.
Okay,
Oh, that's
yeah,
interesting.
So it was like a '90s thing, and like it was popular with the kids for a little while, and then like nobody even looked at them like like a couple of years later. And then I think there was like a scooter that was like kind of popular, like a two-wheeled scooter that was like really popular at the time that like everyone was like trying to get their hands on, and like if you didn't have one, you wanted one. Those are the two I remember from like growing up.
For me, it was definitely Garbage Pail Kids. Do you remember?
Yeah.
You know what that is?
My brother I think got some. They're just collecting dust somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, they were so disgusting, and I didn't find them intriguing at all. I literally did. It was definitely because I was like, "Why am I buying this? I could be buying something else," and the gum was horrible. So it was like, that's very interesting.
Have your kids asked you for stuff where you're just like, no, that's not?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there's something I forgot what it was. There used to be this big egg. My daughters, they would buy these. It's an egg that has stuff in it, and they didn't know what was in it. Yeah. And I'm like, what? How much is this? I'm like, that was a big one. And American Girl, that was like this doll, and I'm like, oh my god, this is crazy. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I buying into this for my kids? The other thing is weird to me because different countries I'm in with cigarettes, the print is bigger and bigger, like the Surgeon General. And I've talked to people and they're like, that's not true. Like they'll even tell me that, and it's like here it's on the front, but like just different, like maybe India, some other places I've been for long periods of time. It's they'll tell you, no, that's a lie. That's not true.
Huh.
Like some people, it could have been the people I was with, but the lie is intriguing because they believe that story so strong that it could be written by the company that's selling it to you, and you still are like,
but they don't believe it.
It's not true. Yeah. Isn't that weird?
Yeah,
that's intriguing.
That's interesting. Yeah.
actually have 7,000 less than usual. And I don't know, should I feel a way about that? I don't know what I should be thinking. Like, I don't know if God's like, all right, take, instead of, studying, you should just focus on your Squirrel Channel more or something. There's a CEO. You ever heard of the band Pomplamoose? Like, they do a lot of really quirky, like their arrangements are just really hip. I really like them. Jack Conte is one of the members of Pomplamoose. He's also the CEO of this platform called Patreon. And he addresses this idea that like these numbers, like are the numbers really the ones that should be telling the story? So he talks about the platforms, and what he says is, if you go back in time and you ask these artists, and I know we have artists, we got artists back here, right? We got some artists. If you go back and you ask Ella Fitzgerald, David Bowie, Prince, what do you want? What's your goal as an artist? You think Bowie would have said, my goal as an artist is to maximize the amount of human hours spent consuming my work? And he's just like, that's ridiculous, because he's an artist. And he says, I want to find that core human truth in my experience and communicate it eloquently and clearly and have it be true and feel true and have someone else see that and have that person think, yes, that feels true and it feels true to them. And I want that person to feel connected to me, even though we've never met before in our lives. But I said a thing that resonated with them and made them feel a little less alone because they felt like there was another person who had the same experience. And so the emphasis on truth, the emphasis on feeling understood, the emphasis on not feeling alone Is the numbers telling the story, or is it the artist, the storyteller, that's telling the story? I have another example about authenticity. So there's this game called That Dragon Cancer. I actually know the creators of it. It's Ryan and Amy Green, and they made the game while their son was going through chemo treatment. The son was like, 4 years old at the time. Son's name is Joel. And I knew them because they were believers, and we would get together at the Game Developers Conference up in San Francisco. So there'd be like 20,000 developers that would come. You have Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo, and they'd all be there, all the games, you'd have like plastic Pikachus, and like everything would be at this amazing developers conference. And we would get there every morning with other Christians, and we would pray, and we would worship, and we would share. And that would be the one time of year we'd see each other. We were all praying for Joel to get better, and he didn't get better. He actually passed away. But they made this game, and it was so powerful, so captivating that that year when that game came out and he had passed away, like the conference was just talking about this game nonstop. And you would think, what a popular game. It's like, they must have done so well, but they didn't. People didn't want to buy this game. Instead, what they saw happening was one person would buy this game, and they would stream it online on Twitch or like on YouTube, and people would dial in. They would log in, and they would watch it while someone else played it, like thousands and thousands of people, right? And what they realized was no one wanted to have that game for themselves because they didn't want to experience such a traumatic experience alone. And so they got together, and they would do it in groups, and they would listen to the prayers of Ryan that he had for his son. Like these prayers are in the game. They have audio clips of his son laughing and the son crying. Like they wanted to really commemorate that. What's really even interesting more than that was that it had a bigger reception outside of the church. Even though it was a Christian game, it had like Christian components and prayers to Jesus in it, that the church didn't have a place for it. It's like almost like this game was so authentic, the church didn't have a place for it. It wasn't part of the church story. It was just too outside the box of the church. And they got more funding from secular groups and secular people than they did from people in the church. And so we really like underestimate how powerful. We think about all these ways we can like share the good news, but we underestimate how well authenticity does. We don't know like how a story like that can kind of connect with people no matter what they believe. I have a quote that I always use because I love George Washington Carver. If you remember from last time, or if you've known, he's the Peanuts guy, an African American scientist from the early 1900s. And he would always talk about, last time I was talking about Ministry for Reconciliation, how to love with all of our soul. And he would talk about like his yearning and to understand the work of the great creator. So this time I wanted to emphasize a different part, right? Understanding the soul's story, understanding God's story, and that how George Washington Carver was demonstrating that his soul hungers for truth, the expressions of his soul in search for truth, my soul's expression of its yearnings and questions and its desire to understand the work of the great creator. Again, loving God with all our minds, like the verse says. So in the verse, like I showed in the beginning, right? So what I want to leave you all with really is these questions to ask yourself. Anytime you're telling yourself a story, you're presented a story, you see.
Oh, that was weird.
Is it over?
It just stopped.
Oh, you're streaming this from Facebook.
Yep.
Oh, that explains. Okay, yeah, I remember. I saw the comments on the live chat on the right.
Mhm.
YouTube is different.
Early 1900s, women listened to the prayers of Ryan that he had for his son, like as good, according to the other, and loving God with all our minds, like the verse says. So in the verse, like I showed in the beginning, right? So what I want to leave you all with really is these questions to ask yourself. Anytime you're telling yourself a story, you're presented a story, you see something on TikTok or YouTube, someone's telling you something, right? We want to ask yourself, you may think like every story has an agenda, every story is propaganda, But it doesn't hurt to ask these questions that, is this educational or is this marketing? Who's the storyteller and what's their agenda? Like, are they really genuinely advocating for the same things? Is this authentic? Is it advertising? Is this my story or is it God's story? And in this, we think about like all the stories that could be there. What we don't want is to be a prisoner of someone else's story.
You got any thoughts about that? Anything you want to drop on us real quick? It's,
I mean,
it's pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty straight.
Yeah. I think this is the takeaway. For people that don't ask, or it's a good reminder too. Just because we're inundated, I think, with storytelling more than ever now. Pre like smartphone, you could just go out and there'd be a period of time you're not necessarily like listening or seeing something, but our technology's made it so that there is somebody trying to tell you a story at every single turn now. I guess driving in radio in the back in the day, but even then, like there's more opportunities for people to tell you stories. So it's more critical than ever. I think that this has always been important, even when books, right? Like books, there were propaganda like pamphlets, like, as far like during wars, they would drop pamphlets, right? Saying how great things were in like, our territory and how terrible things are where you live. Like, that's always been something where you need media literacy for. But I mean, nowadays, there's just more access to your time and attention. And that it's almost like we have to opt out of not hearing someone's story, rather than back in the day you had to opt in and go buy a book or like, I think once radio started, it's probably been downhill from there. And so we just have to. These are questions that are just really good to have a reminder that we should be asking ourselves.
Absolutely.
Or that someone's using our genuine enthusiasm to achieve a goal different than what we're setting out to achieve, that derails the trajectory of the stories that we're in. Or even just having misconceptions and lies and misbeliefs that you have of yourself that were maybe part of someone else's story that kind of clung to you. We definitely want to dispel all of that. Like it's hard for me to like finish without showing you guys some squirrels, because I feel like that's like a thing now. And so I have a video example of kind of illustrating this through two squirrels. So this is Jane and Jill. This first squirrel is Jane. And Jane like always goes to the bird feeders, even though I have a special area that has like peanuts, not like, these are like bird seeds. Like they're not as good according to the other squirrels. And it's also, they're more troubles. Like I put a salad bowl upside down to block them, and they're still like hanging on with their feet somehow to this upside down salad bowl. She's like always going there. And when I come out, she like thinks, she's like really afraid. She's scared and she wants to run away because she thinks I'm gonna eat her or hurt her, right? Which is good. It's good for them to be afraid and to not get totally wrapped up in what's going on, that they don't pay attention to any dangers. But then there's Jill, who like has figured it out that I'm not going to eat her, likely. I know that, sometimes people do, but like she comes right to the window and doesn't even like stop for the peanuts. Like I was like, what's going on? What do you want? So I'm like, okay, well, I have an almond. They're more like bougie. They're like more quality, I guess. But she didn't want that, because not only did she know to come to me, but she like knows to hold out for the better things that I have. She like figured it out. She was like, I'm not taking that peanut. I'm not taking that almond. I know you have big juicy walnuts back there, and I'm not leaving until you give me one of those walnuts. Is that amazing? Like the stories these squirrels must be telling themselves, right? I have another example of a story that I tell myself when I was little. So y'all know the game hide and seek, right? So I used to do this weird thing where I would play hide and seek and then not tell anybody I was playing hide and seek. And then I would just be hiding, and I wonder why no one was looking for me, but it was because I didn't tell them that I was playing hide and seek. And I would just be hidden, And I would eventually get really sad because, like, to me, it felt like forever would go by and nobody's looking. And I thought, man, nobody cares about me. They forgot about me. Like this, like, if I disappeared, like, no one would care. And one day, like, there's a minister, Dr. Heidi Baker was a minister woman that I'd worked with, and she asked me the question, where is Jesus in that memory of you hiding? And that was interesting because, like, in that moment, I had pictured myself hidden, like, in the closet, or, like, sometimes I hide under the table, like, on top of the chairs, but the tablecloth is, like, covering me. I'm, like, there, just, like, laying there. No one knows where I am. And instead of, Jesus is, like, hiding with you, it was that Jesus was, like, actually pretending to make noise around me, to, like act playing with me, like, oh, like Jesus knows where I am, but he's, like, pretending to look for me the whole time. And that was a very vivid moment. And I have one more story. So when I had this moment when I was being yelled at, and the yelling was really loud, and it wouldn't stop, and I was trapped. I couldn't leave. I was just in the corner of a room. It was just the yelling was so loud. It was, like, full of rage, and I would cover my ears. When I covered my ears, I would you just couldn't block it out. So what you have to do is you have to, like, hum to yourself. You're like, like, I can't hear you. Like, I would say to myself while I held my ears, like, make it stop, make it stop, make it stop. So that, like, I didn't need to hear those words. And the same question was asked to me, where was Jesus in that moment? And in that moment, when I went back to that time, I saw Jesus in that room, in that corner with me. He had his hands over me, and he put his hands over my ears. Because as much as my heart was breaking when those things were being said, Jesus was even more heartbroken to see that happening to somebody so defenseless and didn't have anywhere to go. So I want you to take this moment, if you feel safe, and I want to pray. I want you to think about the stories that we're fitting to. Is it your story? Is it God's story? Is it someone else's story? And I want you to ask God to bring up a memory. And it could be like one of your most loneliest moments. It could be something that happened last week, whatever it is. And as you go into that memory, maybe you have caution tape up, like you've already told yourself, I'm never going back there ever again. I want you to ask God, ask the Holy Spirit, is it safe to kind of take off that caution tape? Because I believe there's an anointing in this space, in this campus, in this New Song community, that we don't need to have caution tape over our stories here. That we're going to understand each other. We're going to, through each other's stories, we're going to find comfort for our own stories in the way that I found comfort in Dave's book, in his memoirs. And so right now, in that story, I want you to, whatever God's bringing to you right now, I want you to ask God, God, where was Jesus in this moment? And I want to pray, God, as you're thinking that, just praying over New Song Church as a community, that you may all just be there, understanding each other through our stories. And right now, as you're seeing Jesus in your story, in that moment, may that always be with you. May you continue to always see Jesus in your past, in your present, and your future. And in Jesus' mighty name, may that awareness be made known to you, and may you know the truth of who you are. May you seek the truth of the great creator, the great storyteller. Because we are no longer slaves to sin, we are slaves to righteousness. What I think of it is, we're no longer stories of sin, we're stories of righteousness. So what is that story, God? We pray for that revelation right now. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.
Great. Hey, hear me out on this. I felt something as she was speaking. I don't know if you felt it. It just suddenly just kind of pulled, like, it just came into like a click. And I felt that there are people here that you have words you're hearing. Someone maybe yelled it at you. Maybe they didn't even know you, or they did know you, and that's what makes it worse. And they said things that were harmful and toxic to you. And I feel today, you're supposed to kind of wash that off. Ask God to wash that off of you, cleanse you from those words. There's a power to your prayer. Literally, it's like taking a spiritual bath. Say, Jesus, wash those words off of me. And then what you want to think about is, what's the opposite of those words? And then declare that's for you. Own those words. As she was speaking, I heard John 1. It says, and the Word became flesh. See, God's story wasn't enough just to be out there in the ether. It's just kind of floating around. God's story. It had to be actualized into human flesh. The story had to be told through a human being. Healing came because the flesh of Jesus came on the planet. There was a story being told by a lot of people, but they said that wasn't enough. It has to be activated in flesh. And so I think that's really the message for us. There's a story that's stirring inside of you. It's your story. It's broken, it's messed up. It goes off in these tangents. It doesn't go up and to the right. It often goes down and to the left. And it looks like a total failure, possibly. And then some of you have this trapping of success. Literally, it looks like everything is good. But if we really knew you, there's a deep suffering and agony. Things aren't really clicking like you thought they would click. How do you find healing? It's by the activating of the story inside of you. Take it outside of you and you start to process it. And that's what he says in the Word. If you confess your sins, he's faithful and just to forgive you of your sins. Confession is just taking that story out that you know yourself and bringing it out into the light. You let the fresh air, the spring air come and blow through your house. The doors are open, the windows are open, and that fresh air comes in. It's so hard because we want to just keep turning that story filled with shame and pain. Healing comes when you let it out. You activate it. So that's what I want to encourage you to do today. To find the healing that's in Jesus. The Word became flesh. The story, the beautiful story of love became the flesh. And then we got to experience it. And then Jesus' story became our story. It merged together. So your broken story can find wholeness in Christ. I want to invite you today as we close our service and Eric and the team sing over us. I want you to think about this. What do I need to bring out? That's my story. What do I need to share so I can find healing? Both with God and then also with one another. Shall we all stand?
Wow. That was strong to me, man. I enjoyed that so much.
Yeah, it's we got there's a lot of people coming up to Cheryl afterwards saying like that wasn't like anything they'd heard
Mm-hmm.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really good. Yeah, I that was one of my favorites. Very, very strong. And then the idea of the story, like the stories that we tell ourselves, and then this freedom in bringing those things out, man. That hit me. I started coughing just now. I'm like, am I going to start crying? But I just started coughing. But I found that to be really impactful. Do you have any closing thoughts or of what we saw there? I know we still have some folks in the chat. Do you guys have anything you want to throw out? Does Cheryl want to pop around the corner? Is she sitting next to you?
She was in the over there. I think
Another room.
I don't know. Do you want to hop on stream?
No.
Okay.
I'll be on next week. Yeah, tell them to come back. I'll be live.
All right. Cheryl's saying they'll be live next week. She'll be back on.
Okay. That's what's up. That's what's up. No, but I really love that. I think that's really good. And we're excited. We got through. This is our 10th episode, And then we have this special episode where John comes in, and you did a really good job today. Thank you for your work coming through. We didn't expose you. We didn't tell anybody who you are.
This is
I feel
fun.
really good about that.
Yeah, and Cheryl was still here. She was on screen.
That's pretty amazing, I think. Well, man, I really enjoyed you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for taking the time. And I love when I saw you guys together. It just felt like, you meet. Oh, I do have a question for you. How did you and Cheryl meet?
She was hosting a jam session at the place that she was staying at the time, and just mutual friend invited me over, and then that's kind of how we started talking, and then we kind of hit it off from there.
And how did the stories that you tell yourselves, your stories, in your internal stories and external stories, how did that work in order for you to be able to get together?
It was an uncanny thing of just how much we had in common, and how unlikely that we would have those things in common. So we both played instruments. We both played jazz, which is not necessarily the most popular music type. Both really into video games, and families from Taiwan, all that stuff. To the point where at one point we actually made sure that we weren't related. Because we both had, I think the point we checked was we both realized we had grandpas that were general. That we each have a grandpa who was a general in the Chinese Civil War on the losing side,
wow.
so the part that went to Taiwan. And at that point, we were like, "Wait a second, what's your grandpa's name?" And we did a double take because we wanted to make sure that
Did you do a DNA test?
Eventually we did like 23andMe, but not for that reason. Yeah, we just made sure that the grandpa we were talking about was a different grandpa.
That's amazing. He's like, wait a minute, we this vibe is too good. We need to see what's going on. That's amazing.
Yeah. We weren't sure. We weren't sure if God was playing a joke on us, so we had to.
That's dope. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's a great story to go out on. I just want to encourage anybody who's watching. If you're watching this midstream or whatever, make sure you watch the whole sermon. We're going to republish all these in our first season of 10, where you'll be able to go to the actual link of the actual service that was done. But we just encourage you to really look at your story, look at how you can be free by telling and learning and sharing parts of your story that can give you freedom. I really enjoyed this. And in tradition, as we wrap it up, John, we always close out every episode with "Let the church say, Amen."
Amen.
All right. Blessings. Thank you for joining, and we shall see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Peace.